Hello, my name is Ashley, this is Faithful Rattos, and welcome back. So in today's video I am going to be talking about does and bucks, male and female rats, what are the differences, how different are they, and all that jazz. It is something that I think isn't as simple or clear cut. I don't think does are all one way and bucks are all another. It is a pretty diverse experience, and it really does depend where you get your rats from, what they're breeding from, for their background, their health history, their genetics, their family history. All of that stuff really does impact it. I don't think you can say all does are like this and all bucks are like this. I don't think that's very helpful either. I think this video is going to be full of tends to rather than they are, because it's not as clear cut as that. And this is from my own experience, it's not fact, if that makes sense. I am first going to list general tendencies of both bucks and does, and then I'm going to share things specific to my experience that are things I've noticed with my bucks and does, but it's not a fact. There is also some really great videos by Isamu Rats about bucks and does. She hasn't got one comparison video comparing both of them, but she does have a lot of videos specifically about bucks and specifically about does. I think the series are called All About Bucks and then All About Does, but they're separated into behaviour and health and other things like that. So if you want a more in-depth look at this, whereas mine's going to be an overview, I would go over to Isamu Rats and see what Gemma has to say. That's me right there. I'm sorry for my doe cage here at the moment. Okay, so I'm going to start off with does, then I'll move on to bucks, and then I'll say my personal experiences. So I am less experienced when it comes to does. I've only been keeping them just about a year now, just under a year. Whereas I've been keeping bucks my entire rat keeping journey. I started off with bucks, so I'm a bit more experienced when it does come to bucks. So does are typically more active and engaging. Now, this is a typically, as I said, I think temperament is one of the biggest changeable ones that matters way more about the line and their parentage than it does their sex, but does do tend to be a little bit more active. They tend to like running on their wheel more. They tend to be faster, if that makes sense. Like, they live faster, like they're just on the move more than bucks are. They do tend to be smaller than bucks, like most mammals. They tend to be around 250 to 450 grams. They have different health issues that they're more prone to. So they are more prone to pituitary tumours, and this is because pituitary tumours are very closely linked to prolactin, and prolactin is the hormone that causes the secretion of milk, and that is the pituitary gland is involved in that, and so that is why the pituitary tumours are more common in does. They're also more commonly getting mammary tumours. Bucks can get mammary tumours because they do have mammary tissue, but it is more common obviously for does to get mammary tumours. They also obviously have different health issues that bucks will definitely not be able to get. So they have reproductive issues that they can get, cysts, tumours in the reproductive tract. They can get pyometria, which is an infection in the uterus, things like that. Heat cycles, which is a very particular thing when it comes to does. The heat cycle of rats tends to be about 4 to 5 days. It can be shorter than that, and it can also be longer than that, especially in the winter. They tend to have longer and more drawn out heat cycles just because it's not the best mating time and it's not the best time to be raising litters, so their body naturally spreads them out. Also, the older a doe gets, the more spaced out they can get. They don't stop having heat cycles, but they do become less obvious and further apart. And when they are on heat, their behaviour can be a little bit dramatic, maybe a little bit aggressive and a bit pushy with their cage mates because they are looking for a man. And yes, and on the behaviour front, their group structures tend to be a little bit less overt than bucks, and a group of females is more similar to how they would live in the wild than a group of bucks is. So in the wild, they obviously live in colonies where they live in colonies that are very large, but they have small familial groups where they have a buck and a bunch of does, and that's generally how they live in the wild. So it is more similar to have a group of does. Now, bucks are typically slower, more cuddly, but this doesn't mean that they're more affectionate than does. I have lots of does that are super affectionate, love attention, they're just a little bit more on the move. And again, this is a tendency, this isn't for certain. I can count on my hand the amount of cuddly rats I've had, and that is 2. One of them is a doe, Cheeky, who I recently adopted, you might have seen the video, and the other was an older buck that I adopted, and we only had him for a month. He was very, very elderly and passed away. The reason why he was cuddly is because he couldn't really get anywhere. So that's my experience. I have had 1 cuddly rat, and that is it. So if you're looking for that type of temperament in rat, it is much better to look around for breeders who breed for that temperament rather than getting bucks, because if a breeder is breeding for an active rat-like temperament, the does and the bucks are gonna all both be like that. So that's the thing. Don't get bucks just because you think they're going to be cuddly, because it's a tendency, it's not a certainty. They're also bigger than does, so they average 350 grams to 750 grams. They have different health issues they're more prone to, so they're more prone to kidney issues, and because of that, more prone to HLD. Does can get HLD, but bucks are slightly more prone to it. They obviously are more prone to hormonal aggression as well. On average, bucks tend to have a shorter lifespan as well, only by a couple of months, but that is quite a lot for a rat. Does tend to live quite a bit longer. They can be slightly more difficult to introduce to each other, bucks can, and particularly this goes for adult to adult male intros, can be a little bit more difficult. And this is because in the wild they don't tend to live in big groups of bucks. It is entirely possible to have a harmonious group of bucks, especially if they're related to each other. It's just a little bit less naturally found. As I said, in the wild they live in a big colony, but within that colony they have small groups where there's 1 or 2 males and a bunch of females, and a group of males isn't how we would naturally find them. If they're well-tempered, they will get along, but adult to adult male intros can be a little bit more tricky. Not impossible, but it's something to keep an eye on. Group dynamics in bucks tend to be a little bit more obvious as well, and I think it's just because of the testosterone and the nature of bucks versus does. I will say though that the group dynamics and the roles that each one is playing within that is not as simple as this is the alpha and here are all their subjects. It's a bit more complicated that there's different roles that they would play inside of the group. If you want to hear more about that, Alison Campbell has some brilliant videos on her channel about functional characters, I think she calls them. But yes, it's very interesting, go and watch it. But bucks tend to have a more overt hierarchical structure than does do. Okie dokie, so the last things to say is just a couple of my own observations from my own personal experiences, speaking from my bucks and my does. So I will say temperament depends more on line, their background, than it really does on sex. I have quite a few rats from one particular breeder who sadly doesn't breed anymore, but her rattery was called Kinra, and her line, the temperament that she was breeding for was naughty, outgoing, sneaky, adventurous rats with a very rat-like temperament. And all of the rats that I've had from her have this naughty streak, this getting into trouble, and that is a type of temperament that people would associate more with does, but it is something that I've found across all of the rats I've had from her, and I've had 4 does from her and 5 bucks. So all in all, I've had 9 rats from her, and this is a constant temperament in all of them. I have found that my bucks are generally dirtier, their litter trays get dirtier quicker, and I just think this is because they have physically bigger bodies, and so their poops are physically bigger, and so they produce more waste, and they're dirtier. I don't know if anyone else has experienced this, it's just something I've noticed the past month or so, that my bucks are way dirtier than my does are. I've also found a difference in their eating habits. So my does, I do feed my rats twice a day. Everybody gets fed at the same time twice a day. My does tend to be less motivated to go right when I feed them and eat it. They're a little bit more of a grazing group. So I'll feed them twice a day, but I will often see them eating and scavenging various times throughout the day and the night. So I feed them in the morning and in the evening, and they're very much a grazing group, so they'll graze. Whereas my bucks, they will eat everything when I feed them, most of it, and they're all motivated to do that, whereas the does, they're not very motivated to eat right then and there. I think my bucks are far more food motivated and they want to get it in the moment, whereas the does don't mind as much. And I will also say the last thing is that my does are more hormonally driven than my bucks are. And this can also be a temperament thing and, you know, them just being a little bit naughtier perhaps. But my does, if I open my buck's cage and let them climb on top of the cage, my bucks are happy to mill around on top, most of them, and just chill out. Some of them, they'll try and climb down, and when they do climb down, they're climbing down to explore and just, you know, have some free roam and be naughty in that way. Whereas my does, if I were to open the cage, they would all run up to the top and then they would be gone and they would be going to the boys' cage. That is what they always do. There are some certain rats that do that faster than others, but my does are definitely more hormonally driven and they want to be in the presence of the bucks. Whereas the bucks, if they're out, they're not as interested in the girls' cage. I have had a few, especially during the sort of adolescent hormonal age, so between like 6 months and a year, they're a little bit more interested in the does. However, my does are super interested in the bucks, even the older does, whereas the older bucks don't tend to care that much about the does. Like they're just there, they don't care that much. So those are differences that I have noticed. I probably am missing some things, and maybe I can make an updated video in the future or keep you updated in the comments, but this is my experience. As I said, I think it very much depends where you get your rats from, what they're going to be like, and not necessarily their sex, but there is things to consider when it comes to the different sexes, and I hope I've covered most of them. If you have your own experiences, the difference in keeping bucks and does, please do leave them down in the comments. I'd also be interested in hearing people's experiences who have kept mixed sex groups. Now, technically my doe group is mixed sex because I've got a neutered buck in there. I'd be really interested to hear people's experiences of mixed sex groups, as I said, because I think it's a really interesting topic and is more natural to them, I think, a little bit. My buck, RK, who lives in this cage, absolutely loves his lady friends. He thinks it's great. But yes, that is everything. If you have any further questions, do leave them down below. And I know I've mentioned this in all of the videos recently, but I'm really looking to expand and push my channel memberships. They are open. There are multiple levels. You can spend as little as $1.99 a month and as much as like $15.99, I think. And there's different perk levels and different things going on and different things that you can get, and it would really, really help me out. So if you are interested, if you like my vibe or you like rats or both, please do become a channel member. You can always subscribe. That will hopefully always be free. Give me a like, and yeah, thanks very much for watching. I'll see you in my next video. Bye.